Welcome to the Wordy Pair Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Wordy Pair Podcast. As always, I'm Rudy.
And did you just say Pondcast?
Yes, we are live from Lake Titicaca.
That was my frog sound. So, I hear tell of a book that you've read that you have a few things you'd like to say about it.
Okay.
Why don't we get into that?
Yeah, let's get into this. I just
Before
read a book.
I get doxxed as a frog.
Well, I mean, either a frog or a toad.
One of them.
Yeah. So we had a discussion earlier about the book The Object, right? It was a book that I found while I was looking for the best-selling books that were like in the hard science fiction section of Amazon, right? Like they're actually tagged that way, right?
Yeah, and you simultaneously found them and did not find them. That's quite a...
I mean, I found them, and I bought The Object, and it sucked. But things were a little different with this one, because I actually had heard about this book before I found it on my little Amazon hard science fiction check. So this book is called All Systems Red. It is written by Martha Wells, and it is the first book in what is now known as the Murderbot Diaries series. And, I had heard good things about this book before I even, looked it up, before it even popped up on my hard science fiction search on Amazon.
Okay, hang on.
Yeah.
I feel like I've read something about a murder bot before.
Well, maybe you have, yeah.
I guess we'll have to find out as we go on here if it is what I'm remembering. But I do remember, I think 2 years ago, I tried listening to an audiobook while I was at work that was essentially about a murder bot but it like starts out with this robot on a boat and they get attacked and the robot just starts massacring these pirates. And I don't know if that has anything to do with this.
I mean, if it had the word Murderbot in it, it's probably written by the same person in the same series.
I'm pretty sure it had the word... Yeah, I got bored with it after like half an hour, and I was like, I can't do this. This should be more exciting, considering I'm literally listening to a story about a robot massacring pirates. This should be drawing me in. This should not be difficult,
right? You would imagine that would be the case. But you know what? What I had heard about this book was even more interesting than that it was just like an action story. I had heard that this was some kind of like mystery story with this kind of like interesting, very cool perspective from this point of view character that's a self-hacking robot, and it has to solve a mystery and do some cool stuff, and it's a really cool series, and I had heard all this great stuff. And so I said, oh, cool, I've heard about this. If this is in my hard science fiction bestselling list, maybe I'll really like it. And so I picked up a copy. I even picked up, like a genuine hardcover copy with a dust jacket and everything. And so I sat down on Saturday and I read it. And it's not a bad book.
And my Saturday was ruined.
No, it's not a bad book, but it is painfully mediocre. Like, painfully mediocre.
Sometimes that's worse than bad.
Well, yeah, because, like science fiction needs what you might call yeoman works, right? Not every science fiction story is going to be something that creates a whole new world with brand new things that you've never thought of before, and crazy ideas and amazing futurism. Not every science fiction work is going to be that kind of masterpiece, right? And so there's a need for people to write, not generic's not the right word, but like, just like a workman's science fiction story, right? Where the world is kind of creative and there's a lot of science fiction hooks in there, and maybe there's some cool stuff that goes on. The kind of stuff that attracted people to the pulp magazines and stuff like that. Fun stories, exciting stories, interesting stories that, aren't mind-blowing, but are at least like, oh, cool, that's cool, I like that. Oh, I've never quite thought of that way before. Let's see how this goes, right? Like, there's a need for these kinds of works. In fact, you know what? I write them. My stuff is not incredibly, amazingly creative yet. Maybe someday it will be. But, like, so far it's been like, I've applied some cool science concepts to the idea of the luminiferous ether in, like, a fairly interesting way in a couple of stories. But aside from that, I just kind of write fun science fiction adventure stories where, I haven't really come up with, like, some amazing vision of the future or some cool philosophical hook where it's like, oh, this is something that human society has never thought of before or, reacted to kind of thing. Like, I'm not pretending to be some kind of amazing author of science fiction. And so, like, I read this and, I kind of enjoyed it. It's like, it's an okay book. It has its problems, like, the point of view character calls itself a Murderbot. It is actually a security unit, and what it basically is like a highly augmented human that has also been indoctrinated in such a way that it knows very little about the world, and it has very little, like, sense of self, right?
Yeah.
This is kind of an unfortunate. Well, so the thing about this particular Murderbot, this particular security unit, is that it has hacked its own governor. So, it has like a thing inside of it that if it disobeys orders, it will be automatically punished in such a way as to force it to do what it's been ordered to do, kind of thing, right? That's,
right.
So that gives it a degree of autonomy, right? As opposed to being a completely boring, robot character. It actually has kind of a personality to it. And what it has discovered is that it much prefers watching television to interacting with or protecting the people who have rented or leased its services.
This does sound a lot like the story that I read or started to listen to.
It very well could be. There's 7 books in the series because this is apparently really lucrative. This one that I read was the first one. And okay, so you could make that into a fairly fun thing. You have kind of you'd have kind of the very objective point of view of the robot dealing with the very subjective values of the humans it's got to work with. You have the conflict between what it really wants to do and what it kind of has to do in order to survive. There could be some fun stuff there. Agree, disagree, thoughts?
I mean, I could definitely see doing something with what's the way to put it? Because it's not like Vampire Hunter D where he's got that air of not really caring so much as just getting his job done.
Yeah.
But a similar thing with a robot that is a bit more lax about how he would tackle situations.
Sure.
I'm looking at the titles of the Murderbot Diaries. None of them are jumping out as the one I read, so I'd probably have to, give them a look over to see if it was one. But I do remember a very, like, kind of nonchalant attitude to everything going on around the robot in question.
Yeah.
I'm still not sure, though, because I remember it being described as an actual just straight-up robot in that story. So, who knows?
Well, so, I don't know. Like, in this story, it is described as it is wearing armor, but under the armor it is basically a very highly augmented human. And it prefers to stay in the armor because it basically realizes that humans don't like to see organic parts dripping red liquid, basically. And it gets more or less embarrassed by that, and therefore tries to prevent showing that side of itself to people. Here's the problem. When you have a point of view character that is aloof and sardonic and doesn't really care about any of the stuff that it's doing, it becomes very hard for the reader to identify with that character or any of the other characters for whom it has no positive thoughts. So, just from like a writing perspective, this is already a bit of a problem. And it's not an insurmountable problem. You could give the robot a really like compelling, interesting voice, or you could have it talk a lot about, why it doesn't care about this, but give really good reasons. You could have it kind of have very different reactions to certain people based on how well it appraises those people, kinds of things. In this book, All Systems Red, none of that happens. The Murderbot remains relatively uninteresting throughout the entire book. And that's not the only problem with the writing. The prose is competent, it's reasonable. It kind of pushes through rather quickly and tells a story in a way that, kind of encourages you to keep turning the page. But there's a big problem. And the problem is that I don't think Martha Wells knows how to write action scenes. Because every time the Murderbot has to do something that is action-oriented, it has to run into a place and shoot some stuff, or, it gets shot at and it has to defend itself. All of those times, every single one of those action bits is basically glossed over as quickly and as low detail as possible. In fact, considering how fast the stream of consciousness that you get from the bot is during most of the story, you'd think it would slow down to kind of pay attention in the action scenes. But actually the opposite happens. It appears to gloss over them, as if they're unimportant and uninteresting. Whereas to the reader...
I really think that that was the series that I was listening to. I really think it is. This is sounding just way too on the mark for that story.
Yeah. And yeah.
Before you go on,
sure.
There is a story that comes to mind. You mentioned how, all of the thoughts that this robot has about everything going around it. It could be done interesting, but it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you described how it wasn't interesting and the ways that it could be, it reminded me, I have a pretty good analog, I think, for where this was done right.
Okay.
It was called We'll Save the Galaxy for Food. It was by Yahtzee Croshaw.
Oh, okay.
And his character in that story is kind of like a mostly self-serving sort of person with like one or two moral codes that he lives he lives by a moral code of the heroic captain of a ship, but that doesn't necessarily make him a good person.
Right.
It's just like he wouldn't kill someone who
for
wasn't
no reason.
For no reason, but at the same time he doesn't necessarily care about the people that he is protecting.
Right,
or at least he's kind of a jerk in that sense and kind of brushes everyone off. Little bit more to it there, a few nuances from the robot we're talking about, but kind of a good parallel for maybe a better way of doing it.
Sure.
Plus, the book is filled with action, so there's actually a lot of really good action scenes in the story.
Yeah, that would make sense. Sure.
I'm often surprised by how many people struggle writing action. I know we've talked about this before, because I kind of pointed out I've seen a lot of kung fu movies and I've done martial arts, and I was really into like heroic stories and things like that. So action is just like second nature when I sit down to write it, but I don't know if it's the experience or if it's just that some people don't think about violence when they write it. They're just like, oh, the violence happened, here it is.
Yeah.
And then they move on. Like that might be the case, because maybe that's just how some people view it. It's like, all right, well, this is a part of the story. Like step back and take the focal point off of choreography for a fight scene.
Sure.
Just look at it from the perspective of someone who is thinking about it more in terms of, I'm not being a choreographer, I'm just telling people that there was a fight. Because I've heard it in a lot of books where there'll be a bar fight and it's kind of like, oh, this person has heard of bar fights and decided that one needed to be here, and maybe gave a few points of what happened during the bar fight, and then they move on. The bar fight is not necessarily too important to the story, and because of the way that the writer works, it's not really part of the story that's meant to give you a sense of excitement so much as just move the plot along.
Yeah.
That could be the case, and there's.
I mean,
depending on how the rest of
Yeah.
a story works, that can be fine. But it sounds like there's supposed to be some action in a story about a murder bot. I'm just,
I mean, it would certainly have made the story more interesting, just in general, because there's not. The whole thing is told in this stream of consciousness that is very, very quick about everything that's going on. There's not a lot of detail in general about a lot of things. And so, like, you kind of get the feeling that you're just reading a story that like someone is telling you orally, but they don't remember it very well. And so it's just like blah 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 blah, and you keep turning the page, but there's no real like attention needed there, right? Stream of consciousness doesn't require because the point of view character is not providing me with things that it paid attention to. I also feel justified in letting my attention kind of lapse, if that makes sense. Now you could get around that. You could get around that by having details where details are important. And in a story where almost nothing happens that is of interest except for a few fights, then you would probably... And since the main character, the point of view character, is a vital part of each one of those fights, you'd assume that point of view character would talk about, its strategy and provide a lot of detail, and that it would move from kind of the very floaty stream of consciousness kind of narration to something a bit more interesting a few times in the book, in order to make the reader at least have a moment where the reader's like, oh, I need to pay attention here, right? That would be like, because that's the thing that if you're reading a story or watching a movie or playing a video game, that's the kind of thing that sticks with you, is a moment where you like have to pay attention and maybe actually feel something if there's something cool happening. Whereas what you also could do, what Martha Wells does, is she's like, yep, we got into a fight and I shot a bunch and he shot a bunch and I survived. Let's move on. And it's even more glossed over than the usual stream of consciousness, which, when it's the only hook that the book has, or it's one of the only potential hooks that the book has, it's like, so when a thing is happening that I kind of want to pay attention to, you're telling me not to, which is also further discouraging the reader from paying attention.
It's a little weird, and I can't help, in my head, I'm thinking of that scene in Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust where they had one of the main villains that allegedly was in a battle with D, but they cut to the scene just as the battle had ended, and that was all we got from that, and it was just like, well, this battle is over, and they moved on.
Well, that's a weak point in the story.
Yeah.
Undeniably so. This is one of the problems that seems to happen a lot in Vampire Hunter D, is that the author kind of skips the action. And that's something that is worth criticizing, even if you like those books, right? I mean,
yeah.
This is a book that is mediocre, and it also has that problem, which means that I'm even more encouraged to criticize it even more strictly. Although, I do kind of feel like if this were just a regular book that just came out and, kind of came out to a little bit of fanfare and kind of faded into the background, I would say, this is just, a novice author, just not knowing what they're doing.
And now we're getting to the crux of the problem.
This is not that kind of book, because this book didn't just win the Hugo Award, didn't just win the Hugo and Nebula Awards. It won the Hugo, Nebula, Alex, and Locus Awards. And
I haven't even heard of that last part.
I don't know what they are, but this is a massive award-winning book. And it is a massive award-winning book in specifically the science fiction genre, where it is at best a yeoman work in science fiction. It is the kind of story that you read because you have nothing better to read, because, you already read the good stuff that came out this year. And, this is one of the things that kind of angered me as I thought more and more about this book, is that if I were the head of an organization that has a prestigious award for science fiction, for speculative fiction, I would probably make damn sure that the award would be, at least weighted in the direction of fiction that has a speculative element to it, that actually has something in it that, if not something I've never heard before, is at least a novel twist on something that I may have heard before.
Murderbot apparently has a TV show.
Yeah, it has a TV show. I would not give an award, like I would not give a major award to a book that uses the same extremely tired, everything's a mega corporation and so everything kind of sucks setting. I would not give it to a book that doesn't that basically just posits that there are cyborg war machines. That's not new or interesting. I wouldn't give it to a book that posits that in one sentence that space travel is done through, quote, a wormhole, which is not new, and it doesn't do anything new with it. Like this is a book that I would maybe say, oh, it's well written, and so we'll give it one of our minor awards. But I would not lavish it with the highest quality awards that my organization provides.
Well,
because
slow down there, because I'm fairly certain that this book won its Hugo Awards well after the Hugo Award meant anything. Just to kind of soften the blow a bit.
I understand that the Hugo Award and the Nebula, I understand that all these awards have kind of beclowned themselves in the last 2 decades. But that's the kind of the point that I'm getting at, is why have these awards decided to beclown themselves this way? When what they could do is award themselves to works that at least speculate about things or have a science fiction element that is something that you haven't necessarily seen before. Like, that's kind of the point, is that it's not just a bunch of stuff that you've seen before with a futuristic veneer slapped on. The real interesting works of science fiction, almost all of them, do something with an idea that, that people hadn't played around with before, or played around with in that way before. And certainly it gets harder and harder to come up with that new idea every year as new ideas become old ideas. But this was 2017, and there's not a single... aside from the fact that, that's not creative. There's not a single drop of creativity in this book, or very close to it. When I was finished reading this book, I sat down and I started trying to write a review of this book. Just like notes. And what I did in that was I said, oh, you know what I could call this book? It's basically a fan fiction of Philip K. Dick's story, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Only told from the perspective of a semi-rogue replicant. And I said to myself, well, I wrote that down, and I think it's probably a fairly apt description. I've never been a fan of Blade Runner. I watched it once when I was a kid. I borrowed from the library a VHS copy of the director's cut, and I watched it once. And part of the problem was probably that I was using this worn-out VHS copy, and so all of the visual splendor of that movie was completely lost on me. Plus, I was watching it on a tiny little screen, probably not in particularly good, situation. And so I said, this movie, I'm sure it has a lot of influence and it does a lot of interesting things, but I don't really care about it. It doesn't really appeal to me. Especially since, personally, I don't really care for hyper-pessimistic views of the future. Like, if the future is just going to be the same crap over and over again, then we don't need to think about it. We can just make fantasy stories in the past about feudalism or whatever. And there's no reason to think about how humanity will operate in the future because it's going to be the same old crap. That's, if not something interesting about human society, then there should be at least a sense of wonder or exploration or something like that, where there's a frontier to examine or a new creature to understand or, a new place to visit. These are all things that are kind of part of what I really like about science fiction. And, Blade Runner, the movie, didn't really do that for me. It certainly has some interesting ideas in it, and cinematically, it's a very important film in the sense that it combined science fiction and noir and, adapted one of Philip K. Dick's really well-known stories. And, it's got a lot of really good acting. It's got some really cool lines. It really has some interesting vision, good music. There's a whole lot to appreciate about Blade Runner. It's, merely a personal picadillo of my own that, I'm just not a huge fan of the movie. At least the one time that I watched it. And, I always heard that, it's based on this book by Philip K. Dick called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And I figured that it was just, a straight adaptation. I said, it's going to be the same content that I liked a little bit but didn't really care that much about. But, I've never read the story. And so I read All Systems Red on Saturday. And I started writing the review on Sunday, that is to say the notes for the review on Sunday. And as I was writing that note, like, it's call it a fan fiction of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, I said, well, wait a minute. Is that true? I've never actually read that story. Maybe it's more accurate to call it a fan fiction of, Blade Runner. And so I sat down and I found a copy of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and I read that story. And reading All Systems Red on Saturday and then reading Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep on Sunday was like being in the depths of the abyss and then being thrown into the center of the sun. Because there is more creativity in the first chapter, the first 3 pages of Do Androids, than there is in the entirety of All Systems Red. Just the mere notion that after a final catastrophic world war, that governments believed that it was important to legally require citizens to take care of animals in order to maintain their empathy for other living beings is a more interesting speculative fiction idea than anything that is in All Systems Red.
Well, I mean, when you're placed up against Philip K. Dick, I can totally see that happening.
But it's not just that, because reading Do Androids showed me how amazing Philip K. Dick's prose was compared to All Systems Red. Whereas All Systems Red kind of floats through the action of the story. Whenever there was supposed to be tension in Do Androids, there was tension. And I mean heavy tension. Like, oh my god, I need to pay attention to every single word because there's so much going on in this very moment and I need to see when things break, when the dam breaks, so to speak. I don't know if you've ever read that story. Have you?
I have not, but Philip K. Dick is, it's not easy to pin down exactly what I want to say about him. Have you ever read one of his short stories called Crabs Take Over the Island?
No.
It is my favorite Philip K. Dick story. It's a very short story. The entire premise of the story is that they create this island. Well, they create these robotic crabs and they let them loose on an island. And these crabs are programmed to replicate themselves. And the idea is that they hunt around and gather anything metal that they can find, and they tear it apart and they use it to replicate what they are. The idea being that they're never going to create perfect replicas, and so after several generations of them replicating themselves, they would eventually evolve into new states.
Yeah.
And this goes on for some time, up to the point where all the metal on the island is found, and the crabs have replicated themselves so many times that they start tearing the metal out of each other to replicate themselves, which leads to further damage that causes further evolution, and so on and so forth, until they start evolving into these strange, gigantic or weird creatures crawling along the beach, and the scientists that are there observing them start to run into problems, such as their equipment being tampered with, and like one guy has a metal filling and he ends up being killed by the crabs as they're trying to get to it. It's a very short story, but it covers a ton of material of what happened on this island. And at the very end of it, all you get is this one gigantic crab-like being, this big metal robot that is on the beach as the last of the scientists are being rescued by a submarine. And the submarine is leaving, and the crab is just watching the submarine because it is the last resource for metal that it can see. And so he leaves you with a sense of, oh, well, if this thing ever figures out how to get off of this island, people are screwed.
Yeah.
It is easily my favorite story that he's ever written. Every sentence of that story exudes something interesting, and the fact that he can do that in just a couple pages should tell you everything you need to know about his full-length novels, where he can really go into detail on what's happening.
Yeah, I mean,
so we're talking that level of writer versus your common everyday, look, anyone can be published on Amazon, so basically, people don't. I don't think people hone their writing craft very much anymore. I think
it sure seems like it, because this was, I mean, All Systems Red is, I feel like if I had this idea, I could have written it this well. And I've been writing for 2 years.
Yeah, and I have read your stuff, and I can definitely see where it's like, oh, these are the, I mean, there's good ideas in the things that you write, and so I read the books and I have fun reading them, and that's impressive considering, 2 years is not a long time to be writing.
Right.
I mean, you did a Mountains of Madness kind of story that was just phenomenal. As far as your longer works go, I think that might be the best one you did. But that's the thing. It's like you genuinely went into it caring about how your writing turned out, and you came at it from a perspective of something that you are incredibly good at. Kind of like, I do a lot of fight scenes. I like writing the fight scenes, and I like choreographing them.
Right.
You are a scientist, and so that really shows through in the things that you write that are scientific. And even the things that aren't, even the things where it's just like, there may not be much basis in reality for some of it, but it's presented as such. And, I mean, for the most part, you write hard sci-fi, so most of it is pretty based in reality.
Yeah.
And the places where you veer off a bit are still very grounded in the
structured.
reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it's like, I hope one day to write a paragraph as good as one paragraph in one of Philip K. Dick's stories, right? Like it's aspirational in that sense, right? Like, maybe I'll never manage it, but the possibility is there, and like it's, and every once in a while I'll write a paragraph or two that I'm like, wow, that's really good. I'm glad I wrote those 2 paragraphs, because those are really satisfying, even for me to read over and over again in the editing process. I still look at that and I say, wow, I did a good job there. But like, generally speaking, my prose is mediocre, or maybe a little bit above mediocre in most cases. And like, I look at this book and I feel like All Systems Red was written by someone who has been writing for less time than I have. Or less care, at least.
There could be a multitude of problems going on there, because I've seen other things where perhaps you have someone who can write really well, but they have spent all their time talking to... There's a lot of authors that have spent a lot of time learning how to write from the internet. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you run into a few snags if you don't have your warning signals at the ready, if you don't have the internal alarms. And when people start to take bad advice to heart, you end up with someone who writes a really great story, but as they go through and edit it, they follow stupid rules like get rid of every adverb. So like, maybe you have a wonderful story and then you go through and delete all the adverbs and then someone reads it and is like, this is like a blank canvas. Nothing is happening.
I saw gray. All I saw was gray.
Beautiful gray.
I mean, it was beautiful before it was gray, and then it became gray.
Beautiful has a line through it.
It's infuriating to me that a book like this, like All Systems Red, won all these awards, because what that means is one of 2 things. And number 1, nobody else in the English-speaking world, in all of science fiction authorship printed in English, had a better idea than this in 2017. Or B, these awards have been taken over, co-opted, by nepotistic freaks that seek to give it to people that check boxes that they have in their own minds to alleviate their own personal, like, inferiority complexes.
All right, let me stop you there.
Okay.
Because A, we already know the answer to this one.
Yeah, I know.
And B, there's a television show for the Murderbot Diaries.
Yeah.
The entire industry is basically one big clique at this point. It is the Hugo Awards are awards that are meant to be given either to people themselves who are involved in the Hugo Awards or their, I don't want to say friends. I don't think people like that can have real friends.
No.
They're probably all backstabbers in the
cronies.
end. But yeah, they're cronies, and those awards then get interpreted by either, people that would make television shows or Netflix or anyone as, oh, this means it's a good book because it has these awards, or follow me on this, the clique is much larger than you can possibly imagine. And so long as everyone is on the right page, so to speak, in terms of everyone that they choose to deal with in these industries, it's like, oh, well, we'll give you this award for your book, and then this person here is going to help you get a TV show from it, and and then everyone kind of just, it's just one big feeding trough, essentially. And I have a little trouble...
And a bunch of poorly writing carp floating around in it.
Yeah, and just, I have trouble believing that it's anything more than that, because there's just so many authors who I've read whose work is just like, this is spectacular, and it's even a published novel, like through an agent, and nobody talks about it. And this is like, from a big publisher. And then you look at the indie market, and it's like, there's people who have written some really incredible stuff, and then you look at the stuff that wins the Hugo Award, and it's like, this person basically copied this book from like 1972.
Yeah.
I mean, even stuff that is good, like The Sword of Shannara is almost verbatim The Lord of the Rings, the original Sword of Shannara book. Now, to be fair, Terry Brooks did a really good job.
Well, not verbatim, but it's
very close.
Really?
Okay, verbatim in the sense that pretty much everything that was written, give or take, like, instead of it being rings, they're called elf stones.
Sure.
But
verbatim would also imply that it's the same length as Lord of the
Rings. Yeah, it's shorter, but that in the sense of being verbatim, it is a shorter work where everything in that work is something that is
corresponds
in the other
to something
work.
in the longer work.
So essentially, like, if you were to trim the other one down, it would be verbatim.
Okay, that's a little bit more. That's a little bit more precise.
Yeah,
I think that's better.
But it really is. It's like if you read through one and then the other, and I mean, I will say that even though I would rather, I enjoyed reading The Sword of Shannara. I wasn't the biggest fan of Lord of the Rings, and so I enjoyed reading The Sword of Shannara more. But if you look at the way it's written, there's no doubt that Tolkien had a better way with words than Terry Brooks did.
Sure.
To be fair to Terry Brooks, he then took that one book and turned it into a megalithic series.
Right.
And there's a lot of world building throughout those books from what I've gathered from the reviews I've read and what people have said about it.
Mm-hmm,
and, in the end, that one was probably worthy of a TV show. But, of course, what happened is the TV show had nothing to do with the books.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's necessarily a bad thing that someone looks at something that someone else has done and said, I'm going to try and do that, and I'm going to try and do it better.
Sure.
But I don't think that happens anymore. I think what happens is that there are people who have no interest in improving their craft.
Let's even be clear. It's all right. It's perfectly all right to look at something that you love and say, I'm going to do that, and it's probably going to be a little bit worse, but I'm still going to do that. And maybe someday I'll get better. Like, because this is also a thing that reasonable people can do.
I mean, that's kind of like almost every story that you can come up with can be something that was inspired from something you have heard or seen before.
Sure.
It's weird how many things there are that are in the mainstream that are not interesting and not really, they have not even a veneer of someone trying, I guess.
Yeah, like there's no craft in this. It's terrifying.
There's no craft whatsoever, and there's no, again, you said there's no new ideas. There's lot of...
There's even ideas that are like the Megacorp thing. It's so damn irritating to me because, like, oh yeah, megacorporations control everything. That's why everything kind of just barely works and is crappy. And it's like, Ford Motor Company will sell you a Ford Focus or they will sell you a tricked-out Ford Explorer. If megacorporations took over everything, there would still be gradations of value, and you'd be able to pay for more or less depending on what you wanted to do, or what you were able to afford. Like little things like that bug the hell out of me, where it's like, there's not even any world building. It's like negative world building, where like you take something that you were afraid of in the real world, and then you simplify it to the point where it's so far removed from reality that it's not even effective parody or effective criticism. It's just this little background fluff in the story that the reader is supposed to see and instinctively fall in line with. Like, you're not supposed to think about whether the megacorporation model of dystopia makes sense. You're just supposed to accept it, like everybody else does. And that's not sensible for a person who's reading a book where there's already nothing interesting in it, and therefore I'm going to look at things and see if I can, like, find some kind of way to discuss or think about or talk about something in it in a critical way. That bait don't work.
It's pre-digested food.
Yeah, it's...
Also, if you hear a gunshot, that's me dealing with the dog.
Okay. I just can't explain the difference in how I felt on Saturday reading All Systems Red and on Sunday reading Do Androids, Dream of Electric Sheep. It was a terrifying realization that All Systems Red was not a parody of Do Androids, Dream of Electric Sheep. It was a poor fan fiction of, like, a simplified version of Blade Runner. Because I actually went to the trouble on Monday of picking up a copy of Blade Runner and watching that all the way through. And, you know, Blade Runner cuts out a lot of the social aspects that appear in Do Androids, Dream of Electric Sheep. But there's still a good story there, and it's told in an interesting way. And while I kind of find the extreme pessimism a little bit unappealing, I can't deny that there's a lot of really good material in that movie. And then I thought back again to All Systems Red, and I was like, oh, it's not even a good fanfiction of Blade Runner. It's a mediocre to poor fanfiction of Blade Runner. Why? Why is the world like this?
Well, okay, so let's try to bring a little bit of hope to this grimdark era that we're in. After I shoot the dog, that dog
in the 40th millennium,
there
is only bad writing.
There is only dog barking.
Yeah, too.
But no, let's kind of let's look at what this means. I mean, if we take something like that and say that, okay, let's say there's a fan base for this Murderbot thing. Let's say that there's people that actually watch the television show. I mean, for all I know, the television show is good. I'm not saying it necessarily isn't. I don't know anything about it.
The book itself isn't bad. It's just mediocre. And for a mediocre thing to get all these awards and acclaims and spawn a 7-part series and a television show is like, what the hell?
Well, I mean, it worked for Harry Potter.
Well, Harry Potter was good.
Yeah,
like Harry Potter. I mean, Harry Potter had interesting and new ways to handle ideas and you know, kind of a novel setting, and like it literally became the characters in it were interesting and fun and detailed, and they had interesting conflicts, and like Harry Potter compared to All Systems Red is a masterpiece of fiction. And
that makes me shudder because I've read Deanna Wynne Jones, and that I mean, I've seen Harry Potter before.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, Harry Potter is fine. It's something that, you know, did end up beloved worldwide, and there's value to Harry Potter. We know that much for sure. You know, people relate to it, and I mean, there's a lot of fun and funny things that came from it. I especially liked when I mean, I'm sure I've mentioned before, I'm not exactly the biggest Stephen King fan, although
sure.
To be fair, the man created a pretty incredible, like, world of his own from which all his stories spawn, and it's an interesting idea.
It's interesting and unique and something that you haven't seen before, and you have to at least give him that.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, that's basically the only thing bad I have to say about Stephen King as a writer is that I personally don't care much for his books, but his
Sure.
world building is great in the sense. I think he did something really cool where his entire world building is in the background of everything. Like all of his stories essentially they just barely touch the actual universe that he's created in each individual outlet. But then taken as a whole, he has this larger universe that is just this cool thing that people really get into. Because it took me a while to understand why people liked him so much. I mean, some of his stories were good. I personally liked more Stephen King movies than books. I had trouble reading his books because I was just like, I don't think I think he's using punctuation in a way that is personally offending me. Like he knows me and he writes it that way just to get on my nerves. But putting that aside, you know, he's a good writer. He's a great writer. And the Harry Potter thing, when people were talking about how, you know, a lot of people were saying bad things about Harry Potter, and at the time I remember there was something years ago that Stephen King said on, I believe, Twitter, where people were talking about Twilight, and he said, and there was like some comparison, and he said Harry Potter is a story about friends and relationships and learning to trust one another and work towards solving problems. Yeah. And then he said, Twilight is a story about the importance of having a boyfriend. So, you know, it's like, that's the thing. It's like just putting aside personal preferences. And this is why I brought up Stephen King. Like, because my personal preferences, I don't care much for Stephen King. But putting aside the personal preferences, you have a great writer there. You have a writer that people love. Both him and J.K. Rowling are, you know, have huge fan bases around the world, and they've written lots of books, and especially Stephen King. I mean, the guy's got a new book every month. It feels like sometimes. I haven't read that many of them, so when I actually look at his full lexicon, it's like, whoa, he did all this. Yeah, and if you look at these works on that basis, on like, okay, if I'm not just looking at it from my opinion, like what kind of story do I have here? And you start to look at the stories that are being written today, more and more, you're just like, it really is all mediocre, and nobody seems to really. It seems like one of those things where there used to be people who cared about it and wanted to make it a better thing, and then there was just an influx of people that saw it as a gravy train. And so, you know, they would stick around for as long as the gravy train was there, and then they would leave. Now, that is the piece of hope that I would point out, because you have all the clicks, you have all the people that now run these awards and give them out to whoever they feel is, you know, the most fit in for their clique, and you have places like Netflix and other television places, movie places, that make these deals because the people they have are kind of on the same page, and they make shows about these things. They spend millions of dollars making it. These people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in their organizations setting up events and putting on these I mean, I don't want to call them kangaroo courts because they're not courts, but same concept. It's all chambers. Kind of, star chambers. And thank you. I actually have never used that term properly, I don't think. And the money will eventually run out, I believe, because I don't see these things being as successful as like a Harry Potter or the next Stephen King thing. A lot of them might have a moment of success, and then they tend to peter out and everyone forgets about them. I mean, I look for science fiction constantly, and I have never run across this Murderbot television show until you brought it up to tell me how bad the book was, which does not make me want to watch the show. Right? I don't think there's much longer that we're going to have to wait before. And the thing is, there's still a bit of bad there. I mean, a lot of people are going to just leave the writing scene when they realize there's no real money in it. There's groups of people who get this sensation of power when they get to create culture in these ways. Yeah. And, you know, they'll stick around a bit longer than the people who are there for the money, but even they will have to leave when it becomes a burden financially to continue to do what they're doing, and when they see that everyone's lost interest. At that time, I won't say that there will be an influx of these great new things to experience, and new writers, new authors, everyone cropping up. What will probably happen is a period of stagnation where there are a lot of mediocre, good, great, wonderful writers, the whole gamut.
Yeah.
And the better stuff will start catching on a little bit better, but it's going to be like a slow ride before people start getting back into reading, when they realize, oh, there was all this wonderful stuff out here that we missed. Well, more likely what will happen is there will be a couple of really, really cool things that someone writes, and people will get into that. And then they'll look at similar things to that, and they'll be like, oh, here's another writer that's kind of similar. And they'll kind of start branching out after a while. It's like, okay, and then this writer is similar to this. You get 4 similar writers, and by the fourth one, it's a different genre entirely. And then you have people looking more at the different genres. You have people looking more at, new authors coming up, and then you'll get people that will look back and be like, well, what did we miss from all? Because they'll say things like, oh, these are all indie authors now because, the publishing industry killed itself.
Yeah.
So what about the indie authors that were there before these people? What were they doing? And people will go back, and they'll have like 20 years from now, people will be going back to what's being written now and be like, was there good stuff here? And they'll find it. I mean, it may not matter much for people who want to make money doing it, but
true.
It's still a better vision of the future than just thinking that we're going to be stuck with these in-groups for the
parasites.
Rest of time. Yeah, the parasites.
It's terrifying to me because one could imagine this being a novella, and one could imagine that maybe Martha Wells was just a new writer, and this is, like the first thing that she wrote. But no, she was an accomplished fantasy author before she decided to move to Murderbots. There's at least 10 novels here, including 3 young adult novels and 3 tie-in novels for Stargate and Star Wars, which that's terrifying.
Okay, so essentially what we have here is a fanfic author, and I'm being mean on purpose here, because what I really think is going on here is that this is one of those people who has been around the group of people long enough that have basically hijacked things like the Hugo Awards to where it's like, it's your turn.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know anything about her fantasy. What if her fantasy is really good and she just doesn't know how to do science fiction? But her prose is mediocre, so I can't imagine that her fantasy is particularly good. And her world building sucks. So, it's just painful.
Let's be fair again, because I do like attacking people who don't put in their best effort, and I feel like if you have a mediocre novel, it does mean you didn't try. Yeah. I'm not going to say necessarily I've written some stinkers in my time, but I can recognize them as stinkers.
Sure.
I think that if we take the case of Elie Modesitt Jr., which I'm never going to figure out how to pronounce that guy's name, but it doesn't matter. He did write fantasy stories that I thought were great. And then when I read Solar Express, the first science fiction book that I was aware of by him, it was total, boring, mediocre garbage.
Okay.
So to be fair, I mean, yeah, maybe she did write really good fantasy, and her science fiction story was crap, but because she wrote the good fantasy, there were people that were like, well, she's doing science fiction now, so let's remind people who this is, give her some awards. It could be something like that, too. I don't want to go right to the... I mean, it's not really a conspiracy theory to say that the Hugo Awards has been hijacked, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every award they give out is because of the hijacking, is what I want to say.
Sure.
It still doesn't mean I'll ever pay attention to the Hugo Awards again, but that...
No, it's one of those things that used to mean something on a book and now makes me just feel ambivalent at best.
Yeah, it's like, ooh, this is vomit. I can put this back up on the shelf.
It's probably bad. Yeah,
and I mean, I hate to keep bringing up that stupid spider book, but 100 pages, nothing happened.
Uh-huh.
It is really, really frustrating. This is not as a writer. As a writer, I accepted long ago that it was very unlikely that I would ever make money doing this.
Sure,
and that's probably still very unlikely. I will keep writing because I enjoy writing, and if I ever make money doing it, I will be very happy about that. But I do not look at the world of writing as it is right now and think, yeah, I'm going to make money doing this, right?
Right.
So I don't know when I'm looking at something like the Hugo Awards, I see the Hugo Award on the shelf, and I think to myself, I can't be the only one that's looking at this and saying it has lost any ability to determine whether or not I want to read this. As a reader, not as a writer.
Sure.
I just don't care about anything I'm seeing on the bookshelves. And I mean anything. If I go to a Barnes & Noble, there is a tiny, tiny, tiny science fiction section, which, fair enough, tastes change. Sometimes, something just goes out of style and it takes people a while to really look at it again. But when you look at the three shelves they have, and one half of one shelf has a couple of Asimov books and a couple of Ray Bradbury books, and you scan all of the shelves, and those are the only ones that are good. At a glance at this point, you can tell.
That's terrifying, though, right? Like,
well, yes, because those books were written in the 70s.
Or
and
earlier,
in the case of Ray Bradbury.
Well, like, it's amazing to me that I can that I can read a book like All Systems Red, and despite the fact that I've never read any Philip K. Dick, I can recognize that it is cribbing off of one of his stories that I've heard about. And then for me to go from spending real money on a book that is mediocre to finding, a free online PDF of a story that completely blows it out of the water by an author who's been dead for 40 years or something. It's like, where's the Philip K. Dick book that was published yesterday? And like, I feel like it should be possible to find these things. But even though I've been going through this in kind of like a what would you call it? Like an unbiased kind of way, at least, like I literally went on Amazon and typed in hard science fiction in quotes, and then clicked on like the category that it gave me, and then just looked for the 6 bestsellers in that list. And so far I've gone through 2 of them, and they've both been like mediocre at best. And neither of them has been like actual science fiction in a significant way. I guess The Object had a couple of neat science fiction ideas, but it was pretty weak sauce. And this one just doesn't have anything science fiction other than, like, it's a science fiction setting. There's no new ideas. It's just gray slop.
Yeah, I mean, this was something that I've been making fun of for a long time. Like, I have come across so many things that they have a science fiction setting, but really they're just a crime drama.
Sure.
And it's...
Which can be great, right?
Well, it's not even a good crime drama in 90% of cases.
That's the problem, yeah.
Because it's just as bad as the attempt at science fiction for the most part.
Right. Maybe one day I'll be seen as the Rex Stout of science fiction. I can only hope so.
That would actually be pretty cool. I think that it's funny that, because you bring up Philip K. Dick and compare it to this story, and it's just like, what's going to happen like, right now, if someone were to make a similar story to Philip K. Dick, or like maybe 10 years ago, I should say, if someone were to make a similar story to a Philip K. Dick story, the way it would be presented if someone was talking about it would be like, similar to Philip K. Dick's yada yada yada. How funny is it going to be 20 years from now when someone says similar to Margaret Wells yada yada yada, and nobody has any idea who this Margaret Wells person is? Like, what are you talking about? Similar to Margaret? Who is Margaret Wells? Because that's going to be the case. These mediocre people are not going to be remembered. I don't even remember the.
It's Martha Wells too. That's the best part.
Who was it?
It's Martha, not Margaret.
Wait, what did I say?
Margaret. You said. Her name is Martha. But,
why did you say that name?
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, in 20 years, people aren't going to say, oh, it's like Martha Wells, All Systems Red. They're going to say again, oh, it's like Philip K. Dick's All Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep.
Exactly. And that's exactly what's going to happen.
Shouldn't there be someone in between that's like, oh yeah, he wrote a book that was clearly inspired by Philip K. Dick, but at the same time, he did these cool things with the setting and the characters and the world building that was unlike anything Philip K. Dick ever did. And so this particular book is a lot more like this other book, rather than calling it like Philip K. Dick, which is a step further away kind of thing. I don't know. It's just very. You said frustrating. I think that's a very good word for it. As a reader, it's frustrating that I look for the best stuff that I can find that's been published in the last 10 years, and then I read it and I say, oh, this is okay. And because I haven't read anything really good in the last, week, it's like, yeah, this is okay. And then I read something really good and I'm like, oh, this is what really good looks like. Okay, I need to recalibrate a little bit here because like this is, this is, we have to make the 1 to 10 scale logarithmic or not logarithmic, exponential for this to make sense, right? Like, All Systems Red is a 6, and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is a 9, and like, but that doesn't mean that it's like, a 6 versus a 9. That means it's like a million versus a billion in quality, right? It's I don't know. It's just.
Well, I mean, you and I both know what the best stuff is that's been written in the past 10 years.
Yeah. But nobody else does.
That's true.
That's part of the reason why we have this podcast.
Should we just have a Wordy Pair Award and give it to ourselves?
I think about doing something like that someday.
The Wordies.
Yeah. Best science fiction.
Actually, it would be fun to give other people awards for like a Wordy Pair Award. I don't think the Wordies is a good name though, because
the Wordies is a great name.
It is, but I have a particular distaste for like the Grammys or the Oscars.
That's the point. That's the point.
It is a great parody. Okay, maybe we do run with that. We have to find indie authors that are amazing and dish out some. I don't care if they're
indie or corporate. I just want to find good authors.
I mean, I know that just on its face, having read one book, I've only read the first Monster Hunter book by Larry Correa. I think it's a really good book. I haven't read any of the others. And that's the thing. It's like, sometimes I'm so starved for good writing that when I find an author I like, I will just hold off reading anything they've done for years while I patiently look around for other authors. So I don't just read like one author. Like every week I'm reading a new Larry Correa book. That would not be as fun as like, all right, I'm going to read one of his. Now I'm going to go read one of these. Okay, now I'm going to read one of his again. And it's just like, I can't find stuff. I cannot find books.
But like how am I supposed to, I mean, all I can do is look for people who are advertising stuff or reviewing stuff on like, Twitter or YouTube. And half of those are shills that are like, oh man, maybe if I give, Murderbot a really good review, someone will find me and I'll go viral. It's like that.
Yeah.
Like really, that's 70% of what you find online.
Oh,
and then the other 30% is people.
Now.
It could be, but then like half of what's left over is just people shilling their own books, which I'm guilty of too. But at the same time, I try to produce content that isn't just me shilling my own books, and you do too, since you're on this podcast. And then the remaining half is people that actually do thoughtful reviews on stuff. But we're down at 5% of 5%, basically.
I did a Twitch and YouTube stream recently where the people that were there were like, they spent a good while pestering me to shill my works, and I finally gave them a half-baked commercial for it.
Yeah.
But it was... I tend to avoid it anyway, because it's... I know that, like, dropping the name in one place where no one's going to see it doesn't really matter that much. So it's like, when I'm doing other stuff, I don't want to annoy people with saying, hey, I have this book. I bring it up all the time, don't get me wrong. I mean,
sure.
You've listened to this, I'm sure. Like, when you and I are talking about books, I love talking about the books
we almost considered, as an April Fool's joke, changing the name of the podcast to Rudy and Justin Talk About the Good Guy. That's a thing I have in a text file on possible episodes for us to do.
Well, I mean, we've got a banger for next April Fool's, so we don't want to. We don't want to spoil it.
We're not going to spoil that one, but it is happening.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have, of all the stuff that I've read recently, it's like yours jumps out a lot compared to a lot of things. So it's not just like, I know this guy and he's cool and everything, and there's no way I can convince anyone that it's not that. But I mean, I'm gonna say it anyway. It's like
I say the same stuff about your stuff because I genuinely enjoy your particular approach to comedy, which is something that we don't have any of these days.
As far as I know, I am the only person who writes that kind of comedy in modern writing. I seriously, like, I can't find it anywhere else.
It's insane! It's insane!
I am a singular author in this respect. I really can't find it no matter where I look. I'm just like, someone tell joke, please.
Someone tell joke. I got some sarcasm with a nice helping of pessimism. No, that's not what jokes are. Thank you.
Yeah, that's...
Anyway, let's not overextend this thing too much. There's one thing I want to say before we close out the episode, is that the dust jacket for All Systems Red, the inside of the dust jacket has a picture of Martha Wells, and she's like looking upward hopefully at the sky with the sun rising behind her, like it's some kind of inspiring thing. After reading the most drab, gray, pessimistic, cynical garbage, for spending 3 hours reading this or 2 hours reading this, and you turn the last page and you see the back of the dust jacket, and there she is looking up at the sky like she's friggin' Gene Roddenberry or some nonsense. It's painful.
Well, my friend, is simply a problem of interpretation. Perhaps she's just one of those people who is incredibly surprised by airplanes.
Oh or helicopters.
Yeah.
No, but it's like you remember how in The Simpsons the comic book guy got covered in like some kind of like resin, and so he has to do the inspiring pose from his favorite science fiction series before he dies and becomes inert. She looks like she's trying to do that, but it's like, but then she writes this book about like this shy robot that doesn't like people, and like is very like depressing, and the setting is very depressing, and everything kind of sucks, and everything's very gray, and there's no description or color in the book, and like the Murderbot's not a compelling character, and so you feel like just this grayness exude through the book into your heart, and then you see her looking up at the sky like she's some kind of hopeful like Tony Robbins character or something, and you're just like, no, screw you for even making that the picture. It should be black and white, it should be dark behind you, and you should be staring at the screen, staring at the camera with a stern look on your face. You don't get to look up at the sky hopefully when you write something like this. You just don't.
It should be the farmer and his wife, and you're the wife, and the farmer has somehow killed himself with his own pitchfork.
Something like that.
He's just sort of leaning his neck over onto the pitchfork in a I am now dead pose. Impaled right through the neck.
Maybe he tried to read the book and he discovered that it was very important for him to impale himself with a pitchfork post-haste.
I mean, it doesn't sound like there's much else that you could take away from the book. It's like, well, what did I learn here? Nothing.
Well,
Nothing
I learned that the robot does like a couple of people, but not enough to keep them around.
Yeah, so there it is. Martha Wells. I don't know.
Boring.
I know that, like, it's really difficult to separate the writer part of this with the critic part of this, because it used to be proper form to not attack your fellow writers. And, I mean, I won't say this is an attack. We are definitely critiquing here, but more and more I'm giving way to, you know what? It's all so bad it doesn't matter if I talk bad about it, because nobody's going to care about this stuff. And
as far as Martha Wells is concerned, neither of us are writers.
Yeah, that's the funniest part, because I mean, I'll put my stuff up against this nonsense any day. There's times where it's like if I were to say that with a lot of authors, I would be like, all right, I'm getting a bit too big-headed about this. But I will put my writing up against like just about any modern writer, and certainly any modern writer I've come across looking for a good story. So the difference is that
I'm not necessarily putting my writing up against Martha Wells. Like, maybe there's something in here that I'm not seeing, but I'm trying to treat this as a reader, and like I'm trying to look at this from the perspective of a reader, and that's why I am so mind blown by the fact that this book inspired me to read, a Philip K. Dick book, because like, wow,
see, it's inspiring. She inspired you.
Yeah, that's the best thing I got out of this book is go read a short story from the 1950s and not a short story. Go read a novel from the mid 1900s and discover how amazingly good it is by comparison.
Yeah, if you read a book that is so bad that it makes you want to go read another book, then I guess you can say it inspired you.
The problem is that if the book, ideally for the author, you'd hope that next book that they want to read is something that you've also written, like maybe the next entry in the series or something. But if it just gets them to swear off modern fiction and go back to 1950 and just hope for the best, it's not the right answer. It's not the right answer.
I mean, look, I don't think I'm wrong about this when I say that everything is just bland, and when I say things like I want to make it clear that from the perspective of a reader, I am not exaggerating when I say that I know of no other people who write in the humorous style that I write. This is not a brag. This is a disappointment because I want to read some humorous, action-filled. Well, go ahead.
It's very clear that you have been influenced in a large sense by Terry Pratchett.
Yeah.
But Terry Pratchett is dead.
Yeah.
And so the fact that there is no airy Pratchett for you to move on to reading his stories.
Good pun.
About Cube World or something, I don't know. Is
God.
Like
okay, so hang on, we're jumping. Go back. We need to go all the way back to high school. Justin.
Okay.
The first Terry Pratchett knockoff thing I did was on a world that was a cube. Because I was like, okay, he did a disc, and he based it off of Ringworld.
Yeah.
And so what do I do? I was like, okay, I'll just do a cube. I'll just take it to the third dimension.
Yeah,
and,
easy peasy.
Yeah, it was. I filled a notebook writing this story about some guy who was just having this big adventure. It was very, very much based off of Color of Magic and Light Fantastic, where it was just someone going from one end of this world to the other. And every time you got to an edge of the cube, it was like gravity would shift as you stepped over, so it would feel like you were falling at first. And
see, but that's a unique science fiction idea. Like, technically speaking, like that you did something there. You made world building that people don't do.
Yeah, and the thing about that is for as similar as I tried to make it to a Terry Pratchett thing at the time, that's like the starting point. And from there, you sort of develop your own way of doing things each time you write something new. And I must have gone through 10 generations of different sets of characters, trying different things out with them, before I even came close to thinking, okay, I'm going to publish a novel.
Yeah. You tried different voices too, like the voice in the Chasm of Color, or What the Soul Still Fears, is very different from the voice that I use in the Derelict Project books. And so it's like you learn to do that too, where it's like, oh, this character is not dealing with Lovecraftian horrors, and so he has a slightly different, internal monologue. Stuff like that, like just simple stuff that you learn as you write more.
And the experimentation part of that's not only where you learn more stuff, but it's also fun. So like, okay, for instance, I am in the middle of an experiment right now where I am seeing if I can do a very similar thing to a story I've already written. So there's 3 base characters in The Good Guy, right? You have Urzgelda, you have Tammy Nitbar, and you have Ray Peril.
Right.
And it's a first-person perspective from Tammy Nitbar, and so most of the voicing in it is hers, and there's a lot of sassy dialogue in her head that nobody hears, directed at the other characters, and lots of criticism of Urzgelda. Urzgelda has her own method of kind of haranguing Tammy inadvertently, and Ray Peril has his own way of dealing with those 3 characters. So, writing the next book, when I'm writing Ibralina in the Pixie Lands, I again have 3 characters. It is the exact same setup. I have Ibralina Peril, the cousin of Ray Peril. She's not obviously the same character, but she's kind of filling that role in that book. And then I have Gabriella Madness is the Chupacabra that is both Ibralina's friend and pet. And then I have Hazred Chupacabra, who is not a Chupacabra, but an elf, who is kind of their bodyguard, although they don't technically need one.
Right.
And so now I have
it's a trope, but it's not a tired one.
Yeah, it's another 3-person dynamic where 2 of the characters are constantly at each other's throats, no vampire pun intended, but they can both speak this time, and their personalities are different from the personalities of Tammy and Erzgelda. And so
exactly.
the way that they speak to each other is a little bit different. Like you don't tend to get the same level of Erzgelda talking down to silence because she's the higher vampire lord.
Right. There's less. The hierarchical structure is different.
Yeah, but you do get a lot of jokes where like, so originally Gabriella was a pet, and she became a friend later on. But Gabriella's tastes are weird because she's a chupacabra and because she's very lazy. And so when Eberlina does things like threatening to put her back in a cage, like she used to be, she's like, hey, 3 squares a day? I'm cool with that.
Right.
It's just, there's not the same jokes being told over and over again, but you have the exact same setup.
Let me just interject here for a second. You also are doing something where you're having a character, or you're having a lot of characters that have very different perspectives on, like, basic fundamental principles. Like, I'm imagining like some kind of horrible, what would you call it, like mirror world where Gabriella is threatened to be put in a cage and she goes, "Don't tread on me," like that could be a thing, but like.
That doesn't sound much like her. She'd be more.
That's my point. Yeah, it's like some kind of horrible mirror world where the jokes don't work anymore.
And
if someone told you that they were going to put you in a cage, your reaction would probably be closer to "Don't tread on me" than 3 squares a day is fine by me. I guess is my point. And so you're also like throwing your voice in the, like, to use ventriloquist lingo, right? You're talking as someone else in a way that is very different from the way that you personally might think about things. And so you have to widen your perspective too. Like you have to make yourself believe and value the things that these other characters believe because you're taking on their voice and it's not them taking on your voice. As opposed to this All Systems Red book where it was almost bad enough that I felt like there was Valley Girl gonna come through eventually. Like California Valley Girl from this robot thing. And it, like it was gonna be like, oh, whatever at some point. And I was like, please don't do that. Please don't ever do that. I think that Martha Wells might say that someday, or might have said that at some point, but I hope to God this character doesn't. But I'm not sure that this character won't.
Legally Blonde levels of shrugging off a problem?
I mean, not to that magnitude, but like I was worried about it.
I mean, from what I remember, if that book that I listened to,
part of
was any indication, from what I remember, there was kind of the robots stayed pretty much in the same character. It was not a very interesting character, but it stayed in the same character, but it did react to everything basically the same way, which is not fun for the reader. I mean, if your character is supposed to be a mundane robot, that can have its value, and it can depend on the way you write it. Like Marvin the Robot from the Douglas Adams stories, he kind of acted the same way towards everything, and it was everything that was going on around him that made that interesting. It wasn't him himself.
Right.
But I don't think that this is quite what happened in the book you're talking about.
Nope. No, it did not.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know where the future of writing is. Honest to God, I believe that the current future of writing is in video games, and I don't mean like Castlevania and the big AAA production of a giant 3D open world in which some semblance of a story happens. I mean like the writing that really seems to catch people's interest these days is visual novels. Much more so than... I mean, you take any visual novel that is moderately successful, it's probably outsold a lot of popular books.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it because writing on its own is a unique and fun craft to both hone and a fun hobby to continue. And switching to the world of visual novels, that takes several of the things away from the fun of writing. I mean, one of the things is, if you're working with a team, let's say it's just even two people, you are writing, and then part of the writing process also becomes waiting on the person who is doing the other tasks. Let's say they're the artist. Let's say you're doing the programming and the writing. And that actually is my second point, is even if you're doing it by yourself, your hobby is now not just this one thing that you're trying to be good at. It's writing
like
and programming and doing the artwork, which is fine. Some people are capable of doing that. I'm a terrible artist. If I were to try and do this, it might be a good story. The artwork for it would be silly and obviously not something that I was putting 100% effort in, because even my 100% wouldn't make it much better.
Yeah.
And of course, I would also have to either program it or use some kind of maker tool that helps make
Engine
these
or
things.
Yeah.
And even those require some knowledge of how to use the interface. I mean,
sure.
Renpai is a visual novel maker that, or no, is it? I think it's Renpai, and that's
the name of a language. Yes.
Okay, maybe it's not Renpai then. There's a name for the visual novel maker that is done in Python that I believe it's the one
It's
Renpai. Okay, yeah, so it is Renpai. So that particular one, you still have to kind of have an understanding of how certain certain language structure. It has an HTML setup to it. So you have to indicate what character is talking so that it titles the title box with that character's name. You have to you might have to insert visual aspects like the screen shaking. There's a methodology that's implemented in it to do that.
Yeah, it's I mean, we don't need to get into the technical details of how Renpai works, but
we could talk about that another time. But the point is that you do need to.
Well,
you cut away time from the writing.
It requires a lot more broadening of the things that you actually have to do. Like you could write the story, but you also need to program a thing, and you also need to make art or find someone who can make the art for you. All of these things take focus away from the task of simply writing, which, again, like you said, some people can do okay with and others less so.
Well, this is a further frustration because we are living in a world where you can publish the things you write immediately. And so having a situation where the optimal route is no longer to do that, but to spend more time doing another task before publishing, is like, it's kind of like, the future that we're at is not something that people care about. I mean, literally, immediate exchange of ideas foiled by people would rather play a visual novel, which is fine. I play visual novels. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but the amount of people who have just given up on reading, I don't think it's just because people don't like to read. I mean, we talked about that last time. Part of that aspect is people aren't challenged to use their imagination, and so when they think of reading, they think of some obstacle they have to overcome rather than something that's entertaining.
Right.
But on the same note, people might also not be reading because what's interesting? It's too hard to find anything that's interesting, and
nothing new is meeting that requirement.
And everything that's supposed to tell you what's interesting is bland, and so therefore many people probably come to the conclusion that it's all bland, and they just don't look back.
That could very well be the conclusion people are making. It's terrifying. It's terrifying because it's clear that there are examples of really good writing. Like, I just experienced one, so I don't know. We probably shouldn't keep this thing going much longer.
I mean, it was a good talk. It was
a good one.
We're getting more and more as we do this into, like, the core of some of the problems in the modern world of reading.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. This has been the Wordy Pair Podcast. As always, I'm Rudy.
And I'm Justin.
And we will see you next week with some other fun stuff. Don't know what it is, but we'll figure it out. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Unquote.
Quote unquote, indeed.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's at Rudolph_Kohn. And for Justin, at Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.